many of us here at Glendale have started out on a journey this year of reading through the Bible in a year. And this particular reading that the Lord shared with us comes from yesterday's epistle of readings. And I'd like to just re-emphasize a verse and add another one to what Norm read this morning. And I'm reading this from the New Living Translation, and it says in verse 10, "So why do you condemn another believer? Why do you look down on another believer? Remember that we all stand before the judgment seat of God." Then extending the reading on to verse 13. "So let's stop condemning each other. Decide instead to live in such a way that you will not cause another believer to stumble or fall." I read into an old story a while back, and some of you may have heard it before. If you have, bear with me. But this is a story about a visiting admiral, and he's chatting on the deck of a U.S. Navy ship with some of the enlisted men. And he says, "What would you do if a sailor fell overboard?" And one of the sailors promptly replied, "I'd raise the alarm, sir, and toss him a life preserver." And the admiral, and then he asked a second question. He said, "What would you do if it were an officer that fell overboard?" Well, the enlisted man paused there for a little bit, and he thought about it before he answered, and he said, "Which one, sir?" Which one, sir? Let's face it, folks. We choose which ones we save, don't we? And we choose which ones we love. And we choose which ones are worth throwing a life preserver to, don't we? The Apostle Paul in this week's reading says that God changes all of that. I remember when our boys were fairly young, and Christian rock music first came on the scene. And I can name some of the groups that our boys used to listen to, and I can name some of the groups that the kids up Parsons at St. John's, where I was at, listened to. Yeah, they hauled me off to Charleston one day to a rock concert down at the Civic Auditorium down in Charleston. And I go in with all these other adults, and I'm sitting back there with our youth group, and I'm looking around, and I see these adults starting to pull foam earplugs out of their pockets and stick them in their ears. And I thought, what's going on here? And then the band cranked it up, and I understood why the adults brought their foam earplugs with them. But I remember when it first came on the scene, and I remember some of the newscasters, and I remember some of the church folk in even my home church alike. They seem to be horrified and mildly amused that these rockers for Christ have become yet another stream, another tributary, if you would, of the trickling into that vast American music scene. And some of the Christian folks and some of the reporters seem to be looking for some dirt to dish out. But most of those rockers that were interviewed, they responded to the investigation by voicing surprisingly similar hopes and concerns. Every one of them, without exception, claimed allegiance to Christ. They witnessed to presenting an honest gospel message through their music. They expressed hope that it was this message as well as the music that brought out their fans. And I thought about that, and so maybe I can remember some folks say, "What do you mean fans of Christian rock music?" Well, I've seen tour buses go to Charleston to hear the Gators. Gators got the fans too. There's fans of Christian rock music. And these rockers also candidly admitted that the traditional rock scene was based on often outrageous personalities of band members. And avoiding the traps and the lures of personal stardom rated high on everyone's list of concerns that was talked each and every one of them stressed that that was not personal popularity and success that their bands were after. The real goal is to offer the good news of Jesus Christ to kids searching for meaning and purpose, joy and juice in their lives. And of course, scores of mainline, old line, sideline churches all across America by the whole concept of Christian rock, an oxymoron. And these range from the ultra-conservative churches who deem the rock scene beyond all hope of redemption, to the theologically liberal congregations who simply find rock so culturally distasteful that they choose to assign and abandon it to high decibel secularism. Rock music is an easy target for Christians to hit. It's not the only target, but it's an easy target for them to hit. By definition, it's almost more horrifying than glorifying. It's easy to find examples of music that are unacceptable or not our kind or out beyond the pale. You can find them all over the church. But they're all over the place. But you know, the church can't fall back on this attitude, folks. It can't fall back on this attitude. We're not given the luxury of cordoning off whole segments of society and judging them not worthy of our attention. Alas, the church has often gained the reputation of doing exactly that. And we have. Cordoned off whole segments of our society. In one survey, when people born between 1964 and 1983, and I believe they call those the busters, I think, were asked their top reason for not attending church. They declared it was because the church is filled with judgmental people. What have we done? Why have we blurred people's visions of the body of Christ so far from its true identity? What have we done, folks? The church lives and the church breathes and the church has its being only because of unmerited grace and unmitigated love. Don't we somehow manage to convey a judgmental image when the church service is geared only toward one generation and its needs? Don't we? Don't we manage to convey a judgmental image when the reason for the congregation's continued existence is based on the physical beauty of its buildings instead of the vital life of faith? If the only reason we exist is because of this building, woe are we. Don't we somehow manage to convey a judgmental image when the sermons focus on what we must do to belong instead of what Christ has done to accept us? Don't we give a judgmental image when we're more concerned with lifestyles than with broken hearts? When we're more interested in perfect performance than heartfelt faith? This is what it really rips me. When political preferences are deemed issues of divine election instead of civic re-election. Like paint from a can, folks. All these attitudes seep out of our spirits and down our pews and out of the sanctuary, and they gradually saturate the church building with the stench of a judgmental nature. Folks are right. It's not a very inviting odor. It stinks. In Paul's message to the Romans this week, he cautions both the weak and the strong within these churches church is to respect one another's needs. And for those bickering over the issues of diet and Sabbath observance, Paul suggests this. Since God as common master has seen fit to accept both types of believers as true servants of Christ, then perhaps they should find it in themselves to do the same. Let's be clear here. Paul isn't suggesting anything goes. That's not what he's saying. The list of reprehensible actions and attitudes Paul cites in the first chapter of Romans, I think it's verses 29 through 31, draw some stiff lines between right and wrong. Those who practice slander and maliciousness and deceit are beyond the pale of Christian behavior. The key for Paul is whether an individual is genuinely striving to honor God with his or her actions. And though some of our actions may be questionable, if they're performed with a thankful heart that's turned toward God, then others must simply learn to live with it. Just because you find someone else's behaviors or convictions unfamiliar or uncomfortable doesn't mean that they are wrong. It doesn't. But if anything goes isn't the theme song of a Christian, anywhere goes should be. To reach out with Christ's message of love and forgiveness, we must be willing to look and go anywhere for the gospel. What might anywhere goes means in the life of a congregation? Maybe it means getting into the rock music scene. When is it the apologetics going to be down there, Keith?
The Strand.
At the Strand here in March. You know? Heck, if I'm in town, I may go down and listen. It might mean sliding into a singles bar. It might mean worshiping or opening the worship service to other types of music and styles. It might be inviting the unwashed and the unlovely to sit in our pews. It might be accepting that both the very rich and the very poor are God's servants with us. It might be listening to the concerns of the very young and the very old as well. You know, our natural tendency, folks, is to homogenize our surroundings and our acquaintances so that they are virtually indistinguishable from us. This isn't a healthy environment for the body of Christ. In order to remain fit, we've got to stretch and grow, reaching out and welcoming all of God's children home to Christ. Not just the ones that look like us and smell like us, talk like us, and act like us. We have to welcome home even those we dislike and find distasteful. While walking along a quiet street with one of his disciples, a sage met his rival. And the sage politely greeted his rival. But the man arrogantly disregarded the greeting. And the sage's young disciple became furious, condemning the ostentatious behavior of that rival sage. They continued to walk for a little while, and things remained quiet. And finally, the old sage asked his young disciple a question. Are you angry at a person with an ugly face? Was the question. No, replied his disciple. I'm not angry at a person with an ugly face. Then why are you angry at a person with an ugly heart? The sage so calmly reasoned. Where is Christ calling you? Where is Christ calling us to go and to spread the gospel? Where is anywhere go